The small town of Bellewater was alive with color, laughter, and anticipation. The streets were lined with wildflowers tied to every post, the wooden church doors polished to a shine, and the townsfolk bustling in their Sunday best. Today was the wedding of Arden Vale, the beloved schoolteacher, and Sheriff Cassian Drover, the man who had kept the town safe through droughts, storms, and outlaws alike. Inside the church, Arden stood before the mirror in her small bridal room, the soft white of her dress brushing against the floor. Her fingers trembled as she adjusted the delicate lace over her shoulders. Every face in town was about to witness this moment, the moment she had been expected to smile and walk down the aisle into a life of security, comfort, and love. But Arden's heart felt like a storm had been locked inside her chest. She could feel it, the weight of a secret that no one could understand. A secret that could shatter everything, including the man she loved. The day before, she had discovered it, a desperate message left by a dying outlaw who had stumbled into her schoolhouse late at night. The man, barely able to breathe, had whispered words that burned into her mind: "Sheriff Cassian Drover will be shot tomorrow. The man who kills him wears his own deputy badge. You must stop it." The inkling of fear had been enough to steal her sleep, steal her joy, and now, standing in her wedding dress, it was enough to make her legs quiver. How could she walk down that aisle knowing a killer waited for Cassian? Knowing that if she stayed, he would die in front of the entire town. She couldn't. Outside, the town had begun to gather. Friends, neighbors, and curious onlookers filled the streets, glancing toward the church with expectation. The church bells rang, soft and melodious, calling everyone inside. Cassian Drover, looking sharp in his tailored western suit, waited at the altar. His heart raced with anticipation, his eyes glancing toward the doors at the same moment Arden was thinking of running. He had no idea that the woman he loved was carrying a burden heavier than any bullet could be. Meanwhile, outside the church, Kellen Creed mounted his horse. He had always been a quiet presence in Arden's life, a cowboy who had silently admired her from afar. He hadn't expected to be involved today, yet a strange instinct tugged at him, whispering that something was off. And then, at the most precise moment, Arden stepped into the aisle. The sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows lit her like an angel, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed perfect. Then she turned. The world gasped. And with a sudden movement that shocked every eye in the church, Arden Vale turned and ran. Straight through the doors, across the sun-bleached street, and into the desert beyond Bellewater. The music faltered. The congregation froze. Cassian's jaw dropped. Arden. Panic raced through him. The sheriff bolted from the altar, but the crowd crowded in, unsure how to react. He shouted her name, heart hammering, but Arden did not stop. She could not. She had no time to explain, every second mattered. Kellen Creed saw her disappear over the horizon, a white blur against the golden sand and rocky outcrops. Without hesitation, he spurred his horse forward. Every instinct in his body screamed that Arden was in danger, yet every moment he closed the distance, he also feared what he might discover. Behind her, the wind whipped her hair into wild strands, and her gown became tattered as she ran over stones and through brush. She clutched the small, folded note from the dying outlaw close to her chest. It was her only guide, her only proof, and the only hope of saving Cassian's life. She remembered his face, the shock, the love, the trust. How could she explain why she was leaving him now? Not running from him. Running for him. Kellen caught up to her just as the desert widened into a rocky ridge. He pulled his horse up beside her, voice harsh with both anger and worry. "Arden. What are you doing?" You're ruining the wedding. What's going on? Arden stopped, gasping, her chest heaving, eyes wide with fear and determination. I don't have time to explain, she yelled, barely above the wind. If I don't stop it. Cassian, he'll die. Kellen's eyes widened. Die? Arden, what are you talking about? She handed him the folded note, fingers shaking. Kellen opened it, scanning the hastily scrawled words and the crude sketch of a man wearing a deputy badge. His expression went pale. Where is he? Kellen whispered. Arden swallowed hard, pointing toward a distant outpost among the desert rocks. That's where he'll be. The shooter will be waiting. He's planning to strike during the wedding. Kellen's jaw clenched. He looked at her, then at the note, and finally back at the horizon. You're insane, he said, a hint of admiration in his voice. But, you're right. We have to stop him. The sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the desert floor. Arden and Kellen rode hard, the town shrinking behind them, the wedding forgotten for now. Every mile was a race against time, a race against a killer they had yet to face. And in that golden desert light, with the wind tearing at their faces, Arden Vale realized something. She might have risked everything, her reputation, her wedding, her life, but for Cassian Drover, the man she loved, she would run through fire, through bullets, through hell itself. Because love, Arden knew, was never safe. It was dangerous, messy, and heroic. And she was ready. The sun dipped lower, painting the desert in deep oranges and shadows that stretched like long fingers across the sand. Arden Vale's horse galloped steadily, hooves kicking up clouds of dust. Her fingers gripped the reins tightly, knuckles white. Every heartbeat was a drumbeat of fear and determination. Beside her, Kellen Creed rode silently, eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. The note from the dying outlaw burned in his memory. Sheriff Cassian Drover will be shot tomorrow. The man who kills him wears his deputy badge. The thought was almost impossible to comprehend. Cassian's deputy? The man Cassian trusted above all others. It was unthinkable. But Arden's voice, firm and steady despite her fear, reminded him there was no time for disbelief. We have to reach the outpost before sunset, she said, wind whipping her hair across her face. Kellen didn't answer immediately. His eyes narrowed. Do you even know what we're walking into? Arden shook her head, her jaw tight. No. But I know it's him. And if we don't stop him, Cassian, he'll die in front of the whole town. They rode in tense silence, broken only by the crunch of hooves on the rocky desert floor and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Every rock, every ridge, Arden memorized from the outlaw's description. It wasn't much, a derelict trading post, abandoned for decades, hidden behind jagged cliffs. But it was the only place where the shooter could set up a perfect vantage point. Finally, after what felt like hours, the trading post came into view. It was a skeletal structure, sun-bleached wood warped by wind and years of neglect. A tumbleweed rolled across the entrance as if nature itself was warning them to turn back. Arden's horse slowed, ears pricked. Kellen motioned for her to stay behind. We need to approach carefully. Whoever's inside knows the terrain better than we do. They dismounted, leaving the horses a safe distance away. Arden's fingers hovered over the note, then tightened around her small dagger, an heirloom from her father, more for protection than attack, but it gave her courage. The two crept closer, moving from shadow to shadow. The setting sun cast long, fractured beams of light through the broken walls of the trading post. And then they saw him. A figure crouched inside, half hidden behind a stack of crates. His hand rested on a rifle, eyes scanning the horizon. Arden's breath caught. The outlaw's sketch had been unmistakable. This man was wearing a deputy's badge pinned crookedly to his vest. Kellen's voice was a whisper, rough with tension. "That's him. That's the man." Arden nodded, fear and resolve warring inside her. They needed a plan, fast. The sun was sinking too quickly. In less than an hour, the shadows would make it impossible to see the shooter, or worse, he could spot them first. Suddenly, a creaking floorboard betrayed their presence. The deputy's head snapped toward them, eyes blazing. "You," he barked, raising the rifle. Arden's heart jumped into her throat. The rifle was aimed directly at them. Kellen reacted instinctively, drawing his revolver and stepping in front of Arden. "Don't shoot," he shouted. "We're not here to fight, just listen." The deputy sneered, a cruel smile twisting his face. "Not here to fight? You're trespassing on my land, and the sheriff dies in less than an hour. Step closer, and you'll join him." Arden swallowed her fear and stepped forward, her voice steady. "You don't have to do this. Cassian, your sheriff, he trusts you. He doesn't deserve this betrayal." The man's eyes flicked toward the badge, then back at her. His hand tightened on the rifle. "Trust is earned. And I've earned my revenge." Kellen's jaw clenched. "Revenge for what? You're supposed to be protecting him." The deputy laughed darkly. "Protecting him? I protected nothing but myself while he took credit for everything. Bellewater owes me, and I'm collecting." Arden's mind raced. She had to think fast. There was no time to fight head-on. She remembered the note, the warning, the outlaw's dying plea. Slowly, deliberately, she stepped closer, keeping her eyes on the man's face. "You want gold?" she said, pretending to bargain. "There's enough in the town vault to make you rich. But you'll get caught if you shoot him now. You'll never see it." The deputy hesitated, uncertainty flashing across his features. Arden pressed further. "Cassian trusts you. Don't throw away your life over something petty. Walk away, or at least let us stop this without blood." A tense silence followed. The desert seemed to hold its breath. Then, footsteps behind the post. A shadow moved over the sun-bleached planks. The deputy turned instinctively toward the noise. It was too late. Arden grabbed a loose board and threw it toward a pile of crates. The sound startled him, and Kellen lunged, catching the deputy by the arm, twisting him to the side. The rifle fired, a single shot ripping into the air. The bullet hit the roof beam above, splintering wood and sending dust into their eyes. Arden and Kellen ducked instinctively. The deputy cursed, swinging at Kellen with his free hand. Adrenaline surged. Arden's mind snapped to focus. The goal wasn't to kill, it was to stop him. Protect Cassian. Before the fight could escalate, Arden had an idea. She motioned to Kellen, pointing to the steep rocky ridge behind the post. "If we can lure him over there, we can trap him. He won't be able to escape without exposing himself." Kellen nodded, understanding immediately. "Lead the way." Together, they circled behind the deputy, using the shadows, rocks, and debris for cover. Arden's heart pounded, not from fear, but from the knowledge that every second mattered. The desert sun bled lower into the horizon. Soon, the assassin would be exposed, the town could be saved, and Arden's desperate gamble would either work, or cost them everything. And as the shadows lengthened, Arden realized something chilling. the man she was facing was not just a killer, but someone who had planned every detail to make sure Cassian would die without warning. Her courage and cleverness were all that stood between life and death now. The chase was far from over, and the night was only beginning. The desert wind tore across the rocky ridge, carrying with it the scent of dust and dry heat. Arden Vale crouched behind a jagged boulder, heart pounding like a drum in her chest. The sun was a molten orange ball slipping closer to the horizon, casting long shadows that made every movement treacherous. Beside her, Kellen Creed checked his revolver, his jaw tight, eyes scanning the ridges. Every instinct screamed danger. The deputy, the man meant to protect Sheriff Cassian Drover, was armed, trained, and calculating. Arden knew he would not hesitate to kill. "We have to act fast," Arden whispered, clutching the note that had led them here. "If he reaches the valley from here, Cassian, he'll have no chance." Kellen nodded. "I've got your back. Let's draw him out." Arden peeked over the boulder. The deputy was pacing slowly, muttering under his breath, rifle slung loosely in one hand. He hadn't spotted them yet, but Arden knew he could see every shadow. She took a deep breath. "We need to split his focus. I'll distract him. You circle from the right." Kellen's eyes narrowed. "Be careful. One wrong move and, I know," she interrupted, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her insides. She adjusted her grip on the small dagger hidden under her sleeve. This wasn't a weapon meant for battle, but Arden's courage often outweighed the odds. She stepped out slowly, letting the sound of shifting rocks announce her approach. The deputy's head snapped toward her, eyes narrowing. "What are you doing here?" he barked, raising the rifle. Arden took a deep breath. "I'm giving you a choice," she said firmly. "Don't do this. Don't kill Cassian. You can still walk away." The deputy laughed, a low, bitter sound that carried across the ridge. "Walk away? You think I want your pardon, little schoolteacher? Bellewater owes me. I'm collecting my dues." Arden's eyes flashed. "You won't get them by killing someone who trusts you." He sneered and raised the rifle, aiming directly at her. Arden's heart jumped, but she had expected this. "Now," she shouted. From the ridge behind him, Kellen burst from cover, moving swiftly and silently. His revolver roared, a single shot cutting through the air. The deputy spun, startled, firing blindly in Arden's direction. The bullet whizzed past her shoulder, kicking up dirt. Arden ducked instinctively and rolled behind another boulder. The deputy cursed, fury and panic flashing across his face. He fired again, but Kellen had already closed the distance, dodging each shot with a dancer's precision. "You're done," Kellen shouted, gripping the deputy's arm and twisting it. The rifle clattered to the rocks. The deputy struggled, but Arden moved closer, dagger in hand, not to strike, but to pin him down. She pressed it lightly against his chest. "It's over," she said firmly. "You will not touch Cassian." For a long moment, he glared at them, breathing hard, eyes wild. Then, slowly, the anger drained from his face, replaced by a grudging respect, or perhaps a realization that he had underestimated them. Arden lowered the dagger slightly. "Walk away. Now." The deputy hesitated, then finally nodded, backing toward the ridge. He disappeared into the desert shadows, leaving them in silence. Arden sank to her knees, hands trembling. Kellen placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You did it," he said quietly. "He's gone." Arden exhaled, the weight of the day crashing down. "I hope so." Cassian, he doesn't know what's waiting for him back in town. Kellen frowned. Then let's make sure he survives long enough to thank you. They mounted their horses and rode back toward Bellewater. The town was bathed in the soft, golden light of sunset, unaware of the danger that had nearly struck their beloved sheriff. Every step felt surreal, Arden's wedding dress torn and dusty, hair wild, eyes shining with a mix of relief and adrenaline. As they entered the town, people stopped in their tracks. Whispers spread like wildfire. The bride had returned, but not as anyone expected. Cassian Drover stood at the church steps, panic etched across his face. When he saw Arden, racing toward him with dust clinging to her dress and Kellen by her side, his heart stopped. "Arden," he called, voice trembling. What happened?" Arden dismounted quickly, running toward him. "Cassian, it's safe now. The deputy, he's gone. He was going to shoot you." Cassian's face turned pale, then resolute. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "You risked everything for me," he whispered. "Why?" Arden looked up at him, eyes blazing with honesty and love. "Because I love you. I couldn't let anything happen to you, not today, not ever." Kellen stepped back, letting them have their moment, a faint smile crossing his face. Arden and Cassian turned toward him briefly. "Thank you," Cassian said. "For keeping her safe." The town slowly realized the story, and gasps of admiration followed whispers of shock. Arden Vale had saved her groom, her courage on display for everyone to see. And as night fell, Arden and Cassian stood hand in hand at the center of Bellewater, dust-streaked but triumphant. No formal ceremony had taken place inside the church, but the symbolic union was undeniable. Arden had run into the desert not to abandon her love, but to preserve it. Finally, Cassian pulled her close. "I understand now," he said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You didn't run from me. You ran for me." Arden smiled through her exhaustion, the golden sunset bathing them in warm light. "Always," she whispered. Kellen mounted his horse, giving them a final nod before heading toward the outskirts of town. He had played his part, unseen and silent, the unsung hero of a dangerous day. And Bellewater would remember this forever, the bride who ran into the desert, braving danger, dust and bullets, not to escape, but to save the man she loved. The first stars appeared in the clear Bellewater sky, twinkling like tiny lanterns over the dusty town. The desert wind had calmed, leaving a serene silence that seemed almost sacred after the chaos of the day. Arden Vale stood in the center of the town square, dress torn, dust covering her skin and hair, yet glowing with a quiet, heroic radiance. She had returned from the desert, triumphant yet exhausted, carrying the weight of every second she had risked to save Sheriff Cassian Drover. The townsfolk gathered, whispers filling the air. Their eyes were wide with admiration, awe, and shock. No one had expected the bride to run, let alone ride back into town as a hero. Cassian Drover waited at the steps of the town hall, his suit wrinkled, hair mussed, but his eyes locked entirely on Arden. Every heartbeat in him seemed to echo her name. As she approached, dust swirling around her, he finally understood the truth of her desperate escape. "You risked your life, for me?" he asked, his voice a mixture of disbelief and awe. Arden smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I didn't run from you, Cassian. I ran for you. To save you." For a heartbeat, silence fell. Then Cassian stepped forward, closing the distance between them. He reached for her hands, fingers trembling slightly as he held hers. "And I," he began, but the words were lost in the emotions swelling between them. Around them, the town seemed to hold its breath. Children peered from behind barrels, elders wiped tears from their eyes, and even the deputies who had once doubted Arden nodded in respect. Cassian Creed stood slightly apart, leaning on his horse, eyes soft but proud. He had been the silent protector, guiding and supporting Arden through the desert showdown. Today was not his moment, but he had ensured hers. With a final nod, he allowed the two to have theirs. Cassian pulled Arden into his arms, holding her close. "You've shown more courage than anyone I've ever known," he whispered into her ear. "You saved me, Arden, my life, my town, my heart." Tears glistened in her eyes. "And I would do it again," she whispered. "For you. Always." The townsfolk began to cheer softly, then louder, until the air rang with applause and joyous voices. People threw wildflower petals in their celebration, covering the pair in a shower of colors that mirrored the warmth of the setting sun. A hush fell over the crowd as Cassian stepped back, looking into Arden's eyes with solemn reverence. "Arden Vale," he said, voice strong but tender, "I promise to love you, to protect you, and to honor the bravery you have shown today, for the rest of my life. Will you marry me?" Arden laughed softly, a mixture of relief, joy, and exhaustion. "Yes, Cassian. Yes." The town erupted in cheers. Friends and family gathered around, embracing them, clapping, and celebrating the union that had been forged not only in love but through courage, trust, and heroism. For Arden and Cassian, the formalities didn't matter anymore. Their wedding was not in the polished church with carefully placed flowers and a perfect aisle, it had been forged in the desert, under the golden sunset, in the heat of danger, with life itself hanging in the balance. This was a wedding of hearts, of souls, of courage proven beyond any doubt. Cassian rode forward briefly, tipping his hat to them. "You two deserve this," he said simply. Then, without waiting for a response, he turned and rode toward the horizon, leaving Arden and Cassian in their moment. The newlyweds looked at each other, hands entwined, faces glowing in the last rays of sun. Arden rested her head against Cassian's shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart against hers. "You saved my life," Cassian whispered, "and now, you've saved us all." Arden smiled, her eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. "No," she said softly. "We saved each other." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Bellewater celebrated not just a wedding, but a story of love, courage, and heroism that would be remembered for generations. The bride who ran into the desert had returned, not to escape, but to save the man she loved, and in doing so, had found her own strength, her own destiny, and her forever with Cassian Drover. The town square glowed with lanterns, laughter, and music as Arden and Cassian shared their first embrace as husband and wife. Their love, tested by danger, cemented in sacrifice, and victorious against betrayal, had triumphed. And somewhere on the outskirts, Cassian Creed watched the celebration from the ridge, a faint smile on his lips. He had played his part, unseen and silent, and now it was time for the heroes of Bellewater to enjoy the peace they had fought so hard to preserve. Under the vast western sky, with stars beginning to twinkle like tiny promises, Arden and Cassian began their life together, a life born of courage, love, and the desert that had tested them both. The bride had run from the church, but she returned as a hero, and the groom she loved would never forget the depth of her devotion.